Hello class, I hope you are having a fantastic day and I hope you are ready to learn today. Today we are finishing up our study of Moses. It's the end of our spring quarter, so the whole spring quarter is done and I'm so glad that you've been here to learn and study with us all here in class, even though we're not together. Starting next week, we're going to do something brand new. In a couple of days, you'll receive a binder that has a bunch of different lessons in it. We're going to go through those one by one for the summer quarter, and so you won't receive the mail each week. You'll receive it all at the beginning of the quarter here, which will be next week, and then you'll have it ahead of time for each week. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. What we are going to do today is we are going to review all of the verses that we learned for the spring. So that is 5 different verses. I hope that all of them are familiar to you now. We'll go through them all. We'll say them all together. So please, out loud, let's say them together as I say them here, okay? Ready? For the first one, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Genesis 1:1. All right. After that one, we learned John 3:16. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. All right. Romans 3:23. Ready? Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23. All right, the next 2 verses are actually right next to each other in the Bible. So we have Proverbs 3:5 and then Proverbs 3:6. So Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. And then last of all, Proverbs 3:6. Ready? Proverbs 3:6. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Proverbs 3:6. If you memorized all those verses, congratulations. You memorized 5 verses with us, and that's fantastic. You worked really hard if you do know all of those, and I'm very, very proud of you. Now, let's go ahead and get started. Finishing up our study of Moses, we're going to be talking today about how God helped Moses and the Israelites cross the Red Sea, get away from the Egyptians, and start on their journey to the Promised Land. Remember, God had promised the Israelites that when they left Egypt, he had a land waiting for them. Now, remember, we talked the last 2 weeks about the plagues that happened, about how Moses and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh, tried to get Pharaoh to let the people go. Pharaoh was very stubborn. He would not listen. He would not obey God, and so he would not let the Israelites go. We talked about last week that last plague that happened where Pharaoh's son and a lot of other people died because they did not obey God. That was really sad. And unfortunately, that's what it took for Pharaoh to finally listen and obey and do what God had been telling him all along and let the Israelites go. So for the Israelites, they were very, very, very excited at this time. They knew that it was time to go to the Promised Land. It was time to do what God had been telling them to do and leave Egypt. But it was also a sad time for the Egyptians. They were very sad because a lot of their people had died. Now, the Israelites loaded up their things and they started the long journey. Now, you might wonder how they knew where to go. Nowadays, if we want to know where to go, we use a map, probably on our phones, right? If your mom or dad wants to figure out where to go, they put it into their phone and then their phone will tell them where to go. They didn't have that back then, right? What they had is a miracle from God. God provided a cloud for the daytime and fire for the nighttime to lead them and show them where to go. Now, this wasn't just a normal cloud or just a little fire. The Bible says it was like a whole pillar that was guiding them. Now, obviously, if it was something showing all of these people where to go, it didn't just blend in with the other clouds, and it wasn't just a little fire. This was a miracle from God that God was using to show the Israelites which direction to go. So during the daytime when they were traveling, the Israelites were following the cloud. And during the nighttime, if they were traveling when it was dark outside, they had the light of the fire to guide them and show them where to go. Now, they ran into what we think would be a big problem. It's easy enough to travel when you're walking and there's dry ground, right? It's a little bit trickier if there's water. And that's what the Israelites ran into. They ran into the Red Sea. Now, the Red Sea wasn't just a skinny little river that they could easily build a bridge and cross over. It wasn't where it had a bridge already or a way for them to get in a boat and just row right over. They had to get all of these people across this huge sea in order to get to the other side and continue their journey to the promised land. Now, when the people got to the Red Sea, they probably got kind of upset, thinking, wait a second, we left Egypt, we did what God wanted us to do, and now we're stuck, we're here, and we can't get across this water. But remember, God had provided for them this whole way. God had given them this cloud to follow, this fire to follow. God gave them Moses' instructions. Of course, God is not going to just leave them here stuck at this water. Well, they had a second problem come up when they got to the Red Sea. Pharaoh changed his mind. Do you remember how Pharaoh, we talked about how he had a hard heart and he just wasn't willing to let the people go, even though he knew it was what was right, even though it's what God was telling him to do. Pharaoh finally changed his mind after his son died, but now he changed his mind again and said, I want the Israelites to come back. Because remember, the Israelites were doing all the work for the Egyptians. So if the Israelites left, the Egyptians would have to do the work themselves. They didn't want to do that. So Pharaoh sent his army to go chase down the Israelites and try to force them to come back to Egypt. That wasn't right. He was trying to go back on what he had told the people, which was that they could go. So the Israelites had two problems. They had to figure out how to get across this huge sea. They had to figure out how to get away from Pharaoh's army that was chasing them right into that sea. Well, God provided another miracle. Remember, the cloud and the fire, that was a miracle. God provided another miracle, and God, spread the waters of the sea to create, instead of a bridge that goes over, it was almost a bridge that goes through the water. And the people were able to cross through the water without getting wet. It says in the Bible that God made it so that there was a wall of water on one side and a wall of water on the other side, and where the people were walking was totally dry. Have you ever tried to, clean up a mess? Maybe you spilled your cup on the floor, you clean up a mess. Well, it takes a while to dry, right? This is clearly a miracle, because this is not something that the people could have done. They could not have scooped all that water out of the way and somehow dried that ground that the water used to be on. There's no way that people could have made that happen. This is something that only God could have done. So after God cleared the water, dried the ground, the people of the Israelites, they started crossing through. Well, of course, Pharaoh's army was right behind them, chasing them. And the Bible tells us that once all the Israelites were able to get to the other side of the sea, Pharaoh's army started chasing them and trying to use that miracle that God had done of drying out the water and making that dry ground. Pharaoh's army started trying to use that to cross over and catch the Israelites to take them back to Egypt. You know what happened? God closed up those walls of water that were on either side. God closed them up, and Pharaoh's army were all washed away. Now, the Israelites were free to go on to the promised land. We're not going to talk about, in this study, we're not going to talk about all the things that happened on their way to the promised land. But we've learned a lot of things about Moses, about the Israelites, about the Egyptians, about Pharaoh. And I hope that what we learn from this is the importance of following God and doing what's right. We know that, of course, for Moses, he had a tough time obeying God, but he did it. He obeyed God when God appeared to him in the burning bush and said, go to Pharaoh and tell him to set your people free. Moses said, yes, I'll do that because you're God and you're telling me to do this. But what happened to Pharaoh? When Pharaoh was told by God to do something, he disobeyed, he wouldn't listen. And as a result, he had a lot of people die, he had sadness, he had sickness, horrible things happen. God doesn't want bad things to happen to us, right? That's not something that makes God happy when bad things happen. But we need to obey God. We need to do what's right. Because unfortunately, when we do things that are wrong, there's consequences. We've talked about it a lot before, but consequences are what happens when we do right or wrong. You can have a good consequence or a bad consequence. And when we sin and don't obey God, that is getting bad consequences for our action. We're going to have bad things happen as a result to us of not obeying God. So I hope that you've learned a lot. I hope that you've enjoyed learning about Moses and that you've enjoyed these lessons here. If you have any questions, if there's anything at all that I can help you out with or Mrs. Boyd can help you out with, feel free to reach out to us. Of course, you should all have our contact information through your parents. And we can't wait till we get to see you again, hopefully very, very soon. We love you so much, and we are praying for you, and we will see you soon. Have a great summer, guys. Bye-bye.